June 17, 1944. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel stood face-to-face with Adolf Hitler inside a concrete bunker near Margaval, France. 11 days had passed since the Allied invasion. The situation in Normandy was deteriorating by the hour. Rommel had come to deliver a warning that no other German general dared speak aloud. The front was collapsing. Allied air power was destroying everything that moved. The panzer divisions Hitler had held back were arriving too late and being annihilated before they could reach the beaches. Rommel told Hitler directly that unless German forces were allowed to withdraw to defensible positions, the entire Western Front would collapse within weeks. The Desert Fox, the most famous German commander of the war, was begging to retreat. Hitler's response would doom an army. In November 1943, Hitler had sent Rommel to inspect the Atlantic Wall defenses. What Rommel found horrified him. Despite years of propaganda about Fortress Europe, the actual fortifications were incomplete, undermanned, and concentrated in the wrong places. The beaches of Normandy were far less fortified than Pas-de-Calais. German planners had assumed the invasion would come at the shortest crossing from England. Rommel changed that immediately. He ordered millions of mines laid on the beaches. He flooded fields behind the coast to trap paratroopers. He planted sharpened wooden stakes across every potential glider landing zone. Obstacles his men called Rommel's asparagus. But Rommel knew beach obstacles wouldn't be enough. He needed panzers, and he needed them close to the water's edge. Rommel's superior was Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the 68-year-old commander of all German forces in the West. The two field marshals disagreed completely on how to use their armored reserves. Rundstedt wanted the panzer divisions held inland, positioned to counterattack wherever the Allies landed. This was traditional German doctrine. Let the enemy commit, then crush him with concentrated armored force. Rommel had learned different lessons in North Africa. He had seen what Allied air power could do to tank columns moving in daylight. He knew that any German armor trying to reach the beaches after the invasion began would be destroyed from the air before it arrived. The only chance to stop the invasion, Rommel argued, was to position the panzers close to the beaches and destroy the Allies in the first 24 hours. Once they were ashore in strength, it would be too late. Hitler listened to both arguments and made the worst possible decision. Instead of choosing one strategy or the other, Hitler split the difference. He gave Rommel control of 3 panzer divisions positioned near the coast. He left 3 more under Rundstedt's command further inland. But Hitler kept personal control of 4 panzer divisions as a strategic reserve. These divisions could not move without Hitler's direct authorization. Not Rommel's, not Rundstedt's. Only Hitler could release them. This arrangement guaranteed the worst of both worlds. Rommel didn't have enough tanks near the beaches to stop the invasion. Rundstedt didn't have enough tanks inland to mount a decisive counterattack. And the strategic reserve was tied to a decision-making process that required waking up a man who kept erratic hours and distrusted his own generals. Rommel protested this arrangement repeatedly. Every request was denied. Hitler believed he knew better than his field marshals how to defend France. The invasion was coming, and the German command structure was paralyzed before the first Allied soldier hit the beach. June 5, 1944. Rommel left France for Germany. His wife Lucy was celebrating her 50th birthday the next day, and Rommel planned to visit Hitler afterward to make one more plea for control of the panzer reserves. The weather over the English Channel was terrible. German meteorologists predicted it would stay that way for days. No invasion would come in these conditions. They were wrong. Allied weathermen had spotted a brief window of acceptable weather. Eisenhower made the decision to go. In the early hours of June 6th, Allied paratroopers began dropping behind the Normandy beaches. By dawn, the largest amphibious invasion in history was underway. Over 156,000 Allied troops were storming 50 miles of French coastline. Rommel was in Germany celebrating his wife's birthday. Hitler was asleep at the Berghof, and the Panzer Reserve sat motionless, waiting for authorization that wouldn't come for hours. Only one Panzer Division responded to the invasion on June 6th, the 21st Panzer Division, which Rommel had positioned near Caen. They counterattacked in the afternoon and actually reached the beaches between the British landing zones. But they were alone. No reinforcements were coming. The 21st Panzer Division had to withdraw or be destroyed. Hitler didn't wake until nearly noon. His staff had been afraid to disturb him. When they finally told him about the invasion, Hitler dismissed it as a diversion. He remained fixated on the shorter crossing to the north. At 4 p.m., 10 hours after the landings began, Hitler finally released two panzer divisions. The 12th SS Panzer Division and Panzer Lehr began preparing to move toward Normandy, but Allied aircraft controlled the skies. The tanks couldn't move until nightfall. The roads to Normandy became killing grounds. Tanks burned. Supply trucks exploded. Soldiers died in their vehicles before ever seeing an enemy soldier. Everything Rommel had predicted was happening. Rommel raced back to France on June 6th. By the time he reached his headquarters at the Château La Roche-Guyon, the situation was already critical. The Allies had established beachheads on all 5 landing zones. American forces at Omaha had taken horrific casualties, but had fought their way off the beach. British and Canadian forces were pushing inland toward Caen. Rommel threw every available unit into counterattacks. For a week, German forces tried desperately to push the Allies back into the sea. Every attack was broken up by Allied naval gunfire and airstrikes. The Desert Fox watched his army being destroyed piece by piece. Panzer divisions that had conquered France in 6 weeks were being ground down in days. Reinforcements arrived exhausted and depleted, their columns shattered by air attacks during the journey. By mid-June, Rommel knew the truth. The battle for Normandy was already lost. On June 17th, Hitler flew to France for his only visit to the Western Front since the invasion. He met Rommel and Rundstedt at a command bunker near Margeval, built for a planned invasion of England that never happened. The meeting began with Hitler lecturing his field marshals about holding every inch of ground. He spoke of miracle weapons that would turn the tide. V-1 flying bombs were already striking England. V-2 rockets would follow. The Allies would sue for peace once German technology overwhelmed them. Rommel interrupted. He had not come to listen to fantasy. He had come to tell Hitler what was actually happening in Normandy. German forces were taking 2,500 casualties per day, Rommel reported. Replacements were arriving at a fraction of that rate. Allied air power controlled the skies. Naval gunfire made any position within 15 miles of the coast untenable. The front would collapse within weeks unless German forces were allowed to withdraw. Rommel spelled out the situation in terms Hitler could not misunderstand. German forces in Normandy were being annihilated. Without permission to conduct a fighting withdrawal to more defensible positions, the entire Western Front would disintegrate. Hitler cut him off. There would be no withdrawal. Every position would be held to the last man. The invasion would be defeated by fanatical resistance, not by retreat. Rommel tried again. He explained that he was not requesting retreat. He was explaining military reality. The choice was not between holding and withdrawing. The choice was between controlled withdrawal and catastrophic collapse. Hitler's response was brutal. Rommel was to concentrate on military operations and leave strategic decisions to those who understood them. The conversation was over. As the meeting broke up, Rommel made one final comment that stunned everyone present. He told Hitler that he was glad the leadership had finally come to see the situation firsthand, and that all their troubles stemmed from being commanded by men who directed operations from desks far from the front. Hitler was so shocked by this direct challenge that he couldn't find words to respond. 2 weeks later, Rundstedt reached the same conclusion Rommel had. The front was collapsing. German forces near Caen were being pulverized by Allied naval guns. He requested permission to pull his forces back out of range. On July 1st, Hitler's headquarters denied the request. Rundstedt called Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, the chief of the Wehrmacht High Command in Berlin. He demanded to speak to Hitler directly. Keitel refused. He asked Rundstedt what he was supposed to tell the Führer about the situation. Rundstedt's response became legendary. He told Keitel to make peace, because there was nothing else Germany could do. Some accounts add that he called them fools. Within days, Rundstedt was gone. The exhausted 68-year-old had requested to be relieved, and Hitler used it as a face-saving way to fire him. He sent Rundstedt the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and a polite letter thanking him for his service. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge was appointed as his replacement. One field marshal had been silenced. Rommel was about to meet the same fate. Kluge arrived in France on July 3rd, carrying Hitler's total confidence. He had orders to enforce discipline and maintain aggressive defense. He had been briefed that Rommel and Rundstedt were defeatist, that their pessimistic reports were exaggerated. His first meeting with Rommel was confrontational. Kluge warned Rommel that he had better get used to obeying orders. The tone suggested Kluge believed the field marshals had been making excuses for their failures. That attitude lasted approximately 48 hours. Once Kluge saw the actual situation, the burning tanks, the constant air attacks, the exhausted soldiers holding impossible positions, he became as alarmed as Rommel. Within days, Kluge was sending the same desperate messages to Hitler that had gotten Rundstedt fired. By mid-July, 3 field marshals had told Hitler that Normandy was lost. All 3 had been ignored or dismissed. Hitler remained convinced that willpower could overcome military reality. On July 15, 1944, Rommel sent a written memorandum to Hitler. It was his final attempt to make the leadership understand what was happening. The memo was unflinching. Rommel reported that German forces had suffered 97,000 casualties since D-Day, including 2,360 officers. Replacements totaled only 6,000 men. At this rate of attrition, the front would collapse within 3 weeks. Rommel listed the equipment losses: 225 tanks destroyed. 17 of the Army's divisions rendered combat ineffective. The Luftwaffe had been swept from the skies. The memorandum concluded with a direct warning. Rommel wrote that the unequal struggle was drawing to a close. He urged Hitler to draw the proper political conclusions from the military situation. It was as close as Rommel could come to telling Hitler to seek peace. The Desert Fox was giving his leader one final chance to save what remained of the German army. 2 days later, before Hitler could respond, a British fighter plane would change everything. July 17, 1944. Rommel was returning from a visit to the 1st SS Panzer Corps headquarters near the front. His staff car was driving on an exposed road when Allied fighters appeared. The aircraft, either British Spitfires or Typhoons, strafed Rommel's car. The driver was hit and lost control. The vehicle crashed and flipped. Rommel was thrown from the car. He suffered 3 skull fractures and severe facial injuries. He was unconscious and bleeding when his staff found him. The Desert Fox was evacuated to a field hospital, then to Paris, and finally back to Germany to recover. He would never return to active command. 3 days later, on July 20th, a group of German officers attempted to assassinate Hitler with a bomb at his headquarters in East Prussia. Hitler survived. The conspirators were hunted down and executed. Rommel had known some of the plotters. He had discussed the hopeless military situation with them. Most historians believe Rommel favored arresting Hitler to stand trial, not assassination. But his name had been mentioned in connection with the conspiracy. With Rommel hospitalized and Rundstedt dismissed, Hitler felt free to direct operations himself. The result was catastrophe. In early August, Hitler ordered Operation Lüttich, a counterattack at Mortain designed to cut off Patton's Third Army, which had broken through German lines and was racing across France. Klug told Hitler the attack was impossible. German forces were too weak. The Allies controlled the skies. Any concentration of armor would be destroyed before it reached the objective. Hitler ordered the attack anyway. 4 panzer divisions struck the American lines on August 7th. They pushed several miles into American positions before Allied aircraft found them. The slaughter was total. P-47s and RAF Typhoons destroyed hundreds of German vehicles in a single day. The panzer divisions that Hitler had hoarded so carefully were burning wrecks scattered across the Norman countryside. Worse than the losses was the position. Hitler's attack had driven German forces deeper into a pocket that was about to close around them. While Hitler's counterattack failed at Mortain, Allied forces were swinging around the German flanks. Patton's Third Army raced south and then east. British and Canadian forces pushed south from Caen toward Falaise. The jaws of a massive trap were closing. Over 100,000 German soldiers, the remnants of the 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army, were being encircled in what would become known as the Falaise Pocket. Klug saw what was happening. He begged Hitler for permission to withdraw before the trap closed completely. Every hour of delay meant more soldiers trapped inside an ever-shrinking pocket. Hitler refused. There would be no withdrawal. German forces would hold their positions and wait for reinforcements that did not exist. By August 17th, the pocket had shrunk to a corridor just a few miles wide. German soldiers were abandoning their vehicles and trying to escape on foot. Allied artillery and aircraft turned the pocket into a killing ground. The Falaise Pocket closed on August 21, 1944. What Allied soldiers found inside shocked even hardened combat veterans. Eisenhower visited the battlefield 2 days later. He later wrote that it was possible to walk for hundreds of yards stepping on nothing but dead and decaying flesh. He called it one of the greatest killing fields of the war. German losses were catastrophic. Between 10,000 and 15,000 soldiers were killed inside the pocket. Another 40,000 to 50,000 were taken prisoner. The roads were choked with burned-out tanks, destroyed artillery pieces, and thousands of dead horses. Some German soldiers escaped before the gap closed. Perhaps 20,000 to 50,000 men fled east toward the Seine. But they abandoned almost all their heavy equipment. The German army in the West had effectively ceased to exist as an organized fighting force. The collapse Rommel had predicted at Margival had happened exactly as he warned. It took 7 weeks instead of 3, but the result was the same. Paris was liberated on August 25, 1944, 4 days after the Falaise Pocket closed. By September, Allied forces had reached the German border. The war that Hitler insisted could still be won was clearly lost. Field Marshal Klug never made it back to Germany. On August 19th, As the pocket was collapsing, he took his own life rather than face what awaited him. His name had surfaced in the July 20th investigation. Rommel was still recovering from his injuries when two generals arrived at his home on October 14, 1944. They carried a message from Hitler. Rommel's name had surfaced during the investigation of the assassination plot. He was accused of knowing about the conspiracy and failing to report it. Hitler offered him a choice: face a trial before a Nazi court with consequences for his family, or take poison and receive a state funeral as a war hero. Rommel walked into his son Manfred's room and told him that in 15 minutes he would be dead. Then he climbed into a staff car with the two generals. The Desert Fox died on a quiet road outside his home, a cyanide capsule saving his family from the People's Court. The Nazi propaganda machine announced he had succumbed to his injuries from the strafing attack. Normandy was not the first time Hitler had overruled his generals and caused catastrophe. It was not the last. At Stalingrad in 1942, Hitler refused to allow the Sixth Army to retreat. 300,000 German soldiers were encircled. 91,000 surrendered. Fewer than 6,000 ever returned home. At Kursk, in 1943, Hitler ordered an offensive that his generals warned was impossible. The German army lost over 200,000 men and never recovered the strategic initiative in the east. In Normandy, Hitler followed the same pattern. He refused to listen. He insisted willpower could overcome material superiority. He ordered his soldiers to hold impossible positions until they were destroyed. Erwin Rommel was buried with full military honors on October 18, 1944. Thousands attended his funeral. The Nazi regime praised him as a hero who had died from wounds suffered in service to Germany. The truth about his death remained hidden until after the war. Only when Germany was defeated did Rommel's son Manfred reveal that his father had been murdered by the regime he served. Rommel was not a hero in any simple sense. He had served Hitler loyally for years. He had commanded armies that conquered nation after nation. He was complicit in a regime that committed unprecedented crimes. But in the summer of 1944, Rommel saw clearly what Hitler could not. The war was lost. Continued fighting would only multiply the suffering without changing the outcome. He tried to tell his leader the truth, and paid for that truth with his life. The order Hitler refused to give was never issued, and the army Rommel tried to save was destroyed in the fields of Normandy, exactly as he warned it would be.